The round leaves the barrel the way 10,000 rounds before it left the barrel. Nothing about this one is different. Same Beretta, same grip he has built over a career, same NATO ball. The shooter is a Naval Special Warfare man, and his hands have done this so many times that his mind has stopped watching them. Then the slide breaks in half. The rear section, the part that rides a few inches in front of a man's eyes, separates from the frame under recoil and travels the only path open to it, backward, into his face. There is blood and a broken tooth and a long, stupid second in which a man who has been shot at for a living stands on a peacetime range trying to understand why his own weapon just turned on him. A few months later, it happens again. Different shooter, same break, same way. This pistol would become the standard sidearm of the entire United States military, carried by every branch in the force for more than 30 years. And the most dangerous operators in that force looked at it and quietly handed it back. To understand why they refused it, you first have to understand why everyone else was right to take it. In the early 1980s, the United States went hunting for a new sidearm, and the case against the pistol it already carried was airtight. The M1911 was 70 years old. It fired a fat, slow 45 caliber round that hit like a falling anvil and held only 7 of them before a man was reloading under fire. Its manual safety demanded reflexes that took years to build and that most conscripts never would. Worse, it stood alone. Every NATO ally America might fight beside had standardized on the 9mm, a smaller cartridge, flatter, faster, and stacked 15 to a magazine instead of 7. 1 round across the entire alliance. Twice the ammunition in every grip. A pistol a frightened teenager could be taught to run in an afternoon. The math was not close. So the Army ran the XM9 Trials, and the trials were brutal and fair. Pistols were buried in mud, baked, frozen, soaked, and fired until they choked. When the dust settled, 2 guns were left standing: the Beretta 92 and the SIG Sauer P226. And the Beretta went thousands of rounds between failures, where the old 45 had stumbled every few hundred. In 1985, the Beretta became the M9, and it was issued to every branch in the force. This was not a mistake. It was the correct answer. For the war the Pentagon was buying for, and for the average man it was buying for, the M9 was very nearly perfect. The problem was that the SEALs were not average, and the war they lived in every single day was not the one on the spreadsheet. A regular soldier might fire his sidearm a few hundred times in 20 years of service. The pistol is a last resort, a thing on his hip he hopes to never need. The procurement system that bought the M9 understood this man perfectly, and it built its standard around him: reliable enough, cheap enough, good enough, across hundreds of thousands of pistols and the men who carried them, most of whom would never fire a shot in anger. The SEAL teams broke that standard before breakfast. An operator can put more rounds through a handgun in a single month of training than that soldier will fire in a career. The pistol is not his last resort. It is a primary tool, drawn in the dark, in the surf, in spaces too tight for a long gun, where the distance to the problem is measured in feet. He carries it into salt water that eats steel alive. He runs it, wet, filthy, freezing, and exhausted. He does not need a gun that is good enough on average. He needs a gun that has never once, under any load, in any condition, betrayed the man holding it. Because the cost of being wrong is not a bad score on a test. It is a dead teammate. And here's the gap the system could not see. A standard built for the average is a promise about the middle of the curve. The SEALs do not live in the middle of the curve. They live at the far edge of it, where round counts and pressures and conditions stack into something no peacetime trial ever simulated. The M9 was honest about the war it was built for. It was simply the wrong war. So when the failures came, the teams did not file a complaint and wait. They went looking for a gun they could trust, with the part of the job that does not forgive. They already knew where to find it, because the answer had been there the whole time, and the Army had passed it over for the oldest reason there is. In those same XM9 trials, the SIG Sauer P226 had not just competed with the Beretta. By the cold numbers, it had beaten it. Fewer stoppages, fewer trips to the armorer. On raw mechanical reliability, the SIG was the better pistol, and the men running the trial knew it. Then the Army asked for best and final offers, and Beretta cut its price, and the contract turned on a spreadsheet. The individual SIG cost less, but its total package, magazines, spares, the whole bid, came in higher. So the better gun lost, not on the range, on the invoice. The SEALs did not buy pistols by the million, and they did not buy them on a government invoice. They could buy the gun that had won where it mattered. The P226 did not win the SEALs over with a thicker slab of steel or some secret in its metallurgy. The early guns were built much like the Beretta, and on paper, the two pistols were nearly twins. What the SIG had was a record. In the same brutal trials, it had jammed less, broken down less, and sent fewer men back to the armorer. Other hard users had already staked their lives on it. West German combat swimmers had run it through their own evaluations through the 1980s and come away believers. And word like that travels fast between men who do the same kind of work. And in the rounds the teams put through it, it had not done the one thing they could not forgive. It had not come apart in a man's hand. That was the whole argument. Not that the SIG was heavier, or stronger, or cleverer. The numbers had called the two pistols a coin flip, and the lower bid had broken the tie toward Beretta. But a coin flip is a fine way to arm the many who will likely never need it, and a terrible way to arm the man who has to bet his life on it. The SEALs did not need the cheaper pistol, or the standard one, or the one that won the paperwork. They needed the one they could stop thinking about. The one whose reliability they would never again have to question at the exact moment they could least afford the doubt. They chose the gun that would not lie to them. The first one broke in September of 1987. A Naval Special Warfare shooter, a Beretta of the 92 family. A routine string of fire on a routine day. The slide fractured under recoil, and the rear half came back at the man behind it. He was hurt, not killed. A slide riding the energy of a 9mm cartridge is not built to kill the man behind it. But the message it carried was unmistakable. The weapon you trust with your life just tried to take a piece of it. Then it happened again. Two of the first batch of military-issue M9s let go the same way, and the men shooting them paid the same toll. Cut faces, and one shooter left spitting out a tooth. The teams pulled the Berettas off the line. You do not keep running a gun that comes apart at the back. Not when the back of the gun points at your eyes. There was a bitter logic to why it was the SEALs who found the flaw first. These guns did not fail on a quiet desk in an arms room. They failed because the men holding them were doing exactly what made them dangerous. Shooting, and shooting, and shooting, past any count a desk had ever imagined, day after day, until the rounds through a single pistol climbed into numbers most soldiers would never reach if they served 3 lifetimes. The teams had stress tested the M9 by accident, simply by living the way they lived. They reached the edge of the gun's endurance long before anyone in procurement knew the edge was there. The pistol that was good enough for 1 million men met the handful of men who used it 1,000 times harder, and the seam gave. And here the story splits into a fight that is never fully closed. Beretta looked at the wreckage and pointed at the ammunition. The pistols, the company argued, had been fed rounds that ran hotter than the contract ever sanctioned. Non-standard loads, pressures the design had never been promised it would have to swallow. It was not a foolish argument. High pressure breaks steel, and the teams burned through ammunition by the case. But the Army's own investigators ran the failures down and came back with a different verdict. The problem, they concluded, was not the ammunition. It was the metal. Slides too soft, too low in hardness to take the punishment, cracking at the junction where the locking block mates into the slide. 2 explanations. 1, pile of broken pistols. A disagreement the official record left standing rather than settled. The Army did not have to take the team's word for it. In its own laboratories, the same failure was already surfacing. Engineers running M9s through endurance testing, pistols fed round after round after round, far past anything a normal service life would ever ask of them. Watch the slides crack there too. The same way. in the same place where the locking block met the steel. The failure was repeatable. Push the gun hard enough, long enough, and it found the seam. By the summer of 1988, investigators had counted 14 failed slides. 3 in the field, in the hands of operators, 11 more in the laboratory, under testing. 14 out of a contract for more than 300,000 pistols. By any statistic a procurement officer cares about, 14 is a rounding error, a vanishingly small number, a risk you accept and move on. But a SEAL does not carry a statistic. He carries one pistol, on one body, into one room where the lights are off and the other man is already moving. And the question that pistol has to answer is not how often. It is, will it, this time, with my life on it? 14 broken slides told him the gun could not promise him an answer he could stake his face on. Once a tool fails him, no statistic in the world can put the trust back. The number was tiny. The lesson was total. The military stopped accepting new M9s until the problem was fixed, and Beretta did everything a serious company should do and did it fast. The engineers went back into the gun and added a part whose only job was to admit the failure could happen. An enlarged hammer pin, sized to catch a fractured slide and stop it before it reached the shooter's face. Quality control tightened. The slides were brought back into spec. The improved pistol became the 9.2FS, and it went on to serve the United States military with distinction for more than 3 decades, through every theater the country fought in. Beretta never conceded the ammunition point, and the Army never conceded the medal. The cause stayed contested to the end. But the fix held. The slides stopped breaking. By almost every measure an Army uses to judge a sidearm, the M9 was, and remained, a good pistol. And the SEALs still did not come back. That is the part the procurement world never quite understood. Beretta had fixed the slide. What it could not fix was the thing that breaks the instant a slide comes apart in a man's face: the trust. A part can be redesigned in a year. The certainty that a weapon will not turn on you cannot be reissued with a service bulletin. The teams had felt the failure with their own hands, and no amount of corrected steel could unfeel it. They took the gun that had won the trial and lost the invoice, stamped it with an anchor, and made the SIG P226 their sidearm. They would carry it for the better part of 3 decades. The dark reason the SEALs refused the Beretta was never that it was a bad pistol. It was one of the finest the country ever bought. The dark reason is harder, and it is this: good enough for an Army is not the same standard as good enough for the man going through the door first. An Army buys for the average soldier in the expected war, and it is right to. An operator buys for the worst night of his life in a war no one expected. And the only acceptable failure rate is 0. The Pentagon prepared for the war it could see coming. The SEALs prepared for the one already in the room with them. Same pistol, 2 different worlds, and only one of them got a vote that mattered when the slide came back. That is the line this channel was built to walk. The place where the official record says the decision was sound, and the men who lived it knew there was a colder reason underneath. If that is the history you came for, the part the manuals leave out, stay with us. Because the standard book closes when the contract is signed. The real story starts the moment a man feels his weapon break in his hand and decides, quietly, that good enough was never going to be good enough for him.